Okay, well it's a pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker. Open Data Manchester is going to talk about end user requirements around environmental data. I'd like to introduce Matt. I think he's going to start.
Yeah, let's start.
Thank you very much.
Right, hello everyone. Good to see all of you. Hope you all enjoyed your lunch. So yeah, my name's Matt Basford. I work for an organisation called Open Data Manchester. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Yes. Can you hear me back to yeah? Great stuff, excellent. Yeah, and I'm joined by my colleague Sophie Walker, who's going to talk through some of our findings from this project as well. So yeah, I'm going to, let's just move it on. Yeah, so we're going to talk you through a user research project that we did, which was looking at opening up environmental data to greater kind of use. So looking at some of the barriers that people face when they're using environmental data at the moment. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we were researching, how we did that, what our method was, and then we're both going to talk you a little bit through some of the things that we found along the way. And hopefully some of those might kind of resonate. Well, maybe not hopefully, because they're kind of negative things, but you know, yeah, you know what I mean. Right, so this is a bit about who we are. So Open Data Manchester, we're an organisation that exists to promote responsible data practices that focus on making sure that data serves the needs of all and help people, planet and prosperity. So that's a bit about who we are. This particular project was around the Digital Solutions Hub or Digital Solutions Programme. So UK Research and Innovation invested a lot of money there to develop this new hub. And the purpose of this is to try and connect the National Environment Research Council data from kind of 5 different existing kind of repositories and hubs, and also to connect that with external data sources as well. And as well as just the data itself, this is also integrated with Jasmine, which is basically a supercomputer that is there to allow for analysis and modelling of that data. So that's what we were looking into. Our research aims were to think about who is it that might be using this. So who is it that's using environmental data at the moment, who might be interested in using this new hub? What are those people trying to achieve when they use environmental data at the moment? What's some of the different needs out there? And to look at what some of the kind of processes that people use when they use environmental data, what are some of the challenges that they face, and then from that to then kind of think about what some of the solutions of this hub could make possible. So basically our approach was a kind of user research approach. You can find out more about kind of user research for those that aren't familiar through the gov.uk service manual. Yeah, it's all about kind of understanding the requirements and the needs of users themselves and working in an iterative way over time from that. So this project was really about the kind of discovery phase of getting a sense of the needs out there. So a little bit about our method then. I'm just going to kind of quickly move through some of the things we did. But so first of all, we mapped out who some of the potential users might be. So working with our kind of client and the team, getting a sense of who is it out there that's likely to be using this data, and we use that to then reach out from there. We also, really important early stage in projects like this, mapped out what do we think we already know, what do we think we kind of know, what's kind of our assumptions that we maybe need to test out and check we've got right, and what don't we know, what are the things that we need to find out more about. So then, with that in hand, that then informed the approach that we kind of took out through a series of workshops that we did across the country. So this is our faithful Lego map here, really high tech, that we've plotted the locations of some of those workshops from. You can see they were across the country. And on the left here is some of the organisations that came along to some of those workshops. So we had some kind of quangos that are kind of working with environmental data, government departments, some academics, people from local authorities. So yeah, we tried to get some kind of charities as well. So we tried to get a mix, and also private companies. Yeah, tried to get a mix of different people who might be using this data, because they're really thinking about, how can we expand this, how can we get more people using the data that's there. So at the workshops, this is a kind of simplified little picture of some of the things we did, but we asked people about how do they use environmental data at the moment, how does it, what they're trying to do with it, how important is it to their role. And then we kind of went through a bit of a journey map of what are the steps people go through? So as people are using environmental data, what are the steps on that journey? What are they thinking about at each stage of that journey? What are the kind of some of the tools they're using, so we get a real sense of what that kind of looks like. And so moving into our kind of findings, so one of the first things we did was try to separate out what we've called archetypes. So this is kind of groupings of different people using environmental data. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but we tried to kind of focus it on some of the different ways that people were using data to try and get a sense of what are some of those different kind of ways in which people are approaching this task. So I'm just going to kind of quickly talk through some of these just to give you a little flavour of some of the differences out there. So if I start off in the kind of top left, see if I can use my little pointer, there we go. So the top left there was analysts who are kind of monitoring the state of the environment. We tended to find people in this kind of bucket, tended to work with quite kind of high quality, kind of standardised kind of data sources, tended to do more kind of standardised forms of analysis in order to demonstrate the health of the environment. Moving down underneath that, then there were some of the kind of authors of monitoring frameworks. So these were people who were kind of deciding how we could monitor the health of the environment. So they tended to be thinking a little bit more about what data is out there, what data is upcoming. So they were kind of getting that sense of that kind of overview of what's available. Moving into the top at the middle there, were people who were trying to answer questions with the data. So, for example, someone was trying to think about would pests become established in this country, so they had a kind of particular question they needed to answer. They were going out finding data that they could use to answer that, and then kind of performing analysis to kind of come up with an answer, basically. Going down, so there were people who were working, so quite a lot of people we spoke to were working with geographic information systems, but yeah, obviously that was a quite important kind of difference. People who were working with that versus other types of data, so to be working in more of a with map-based formats. And had requirements around being able to kind of visualise that and explore trends in a slightly different way to other groups. Underneath there were people in more of a kind of data support role, so that tended to be people, for example, at local authorities working on lots of different topics, helping policy colleagues to kind of understand some of the trends out there and helping them to explore that data a bit more. The last two over there at the side were kind of data leaders, so they were people who were thinking about kind of ecosystem of how data got used in their organisation, in partnerships they worked with. So again, we're kind of trying to get a handle on what data's out there, what's upcoming, what can we do with that, maybe prioritising, might be able to commission some extra data as well. And lastly, they're data stewards, reflecting the fact that some people were thinking about how data is stored, how other people can access data that they've kind of got responsibility for. So those are some of the different people out there. Maybe you can see yourself in some of those, maybe you can't. But yeah, that's a little breakdown of who we thought was out there. And the next stage that we did to try and kind of break this down was to think about some of the stages that people go through, and some of the kind of common needs that there are along the way. So this is kind of quite a large picture of the stages, and we'll focus a little bit more on some of the kind of key ones in a minute. But if I just kind of quickly talk you through some of these. It's not necessarily exactly sequential, and not necessarily everyone will go through all these stages, but these are some of the kind of needs that we identify that people tend to go through. So starting off on the left here, there was something around understanding the ask. So quite often someone would kind of come to people and say, there's a particular kind of reason that we want you to go out and work with data, and so kind of getting a sense of that was quite an important first step for people. There was something around kind of comprehending the topic, so sometimes people working in topics they're less familiar with, they need to get a sense of that topic, of what data might be needed to answer their question. Sometimes there's a kind of prioritisation stage, working out where can we best focus our efforts with what's available. Obviously then quite an important one around finding the data that's out there, verifying whether it will suit your purposes, whether it matches what you require. Sometimes people had the ability to gather more data. It's kind of a luxury for some of the people, but some people had that. Getting access to the data, so that might be kind of requesting access for some data sets, could be downloading it, linking to it. Process, which has quite a lot in, that was around kind of quality assuring data, cleaning data, transforming it into the kind of the forms needed. And then moving along, there was obviously kind of performing analysis, and some people a little bit before that would kind of test things out quickly. So before they kind of really got to grips with the data, they'd be trying to kind of get a sense of, is this going to work? So there's that kind of stage as well. And then thinking about how they can present their findings, promoting those, so make sure other people become aware of them, sometimes getting feedback about those sets and iterating them, and lastly that kind of managed stage, thinking about how they're stored and how other people can kind of get access to them. And I'm going to pass on to colleague Sophie to take you through some advice from here.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. So in the interest of time, I don't have lots of time to kind of dig into all of the different stages. The ones that are highlighted are what we've kind of termed key stages. So as Matt said, most users would go through quite a lot of those stages, but not necessarily all of them, and they weren't always sequential. But these sort of the green ones were the ones that the majority of people kind of ended up having to go through. And I suppose just worth pointing out a couple of things. So as Matt said, the sort of find and verify stages were quite key and ones that caused people a lot of challenges in terms of being able to actually, find the data that they were looking for and then quickly assess whether or not it met their needs. And what we found is that most users seem to have a bit of a sort of checklist in terms of when they found data around what they'd go through to try and work out whether it was valid for their purpose or not. And what was interesting is depending on the user, depending on the organisation they're in and the purpose of that, that they needed the data for, whether something would meet that checklist or not might be different. But interestingly, the questions are quite similar. So, but am I allowed to use it for this purpose? And is it at the granularity that I need and the time period that I need and the geography that I need and all these sorts of different things? And does it cost me? How can I kind of get access to it? And so all of these things were things that people are having to try and do as quickly as possible before they could actually even start getting their hands on the data and starting to work with it. And access was another point where people were really struggling in terms of being able to efficiently and effectively access the data they wanted. And again, in process, often the data wasn't of a particularly good quality, or they'd finally get their hands on the data and actually the metadata wasn't very good, and it turned out that it wasn't quite what they thought it was, or it wasn't suitable for their purpose. So there's a lot of frustrations in here. So I've talked a little bit about this, but I just wanted to kind of give a few kind of overviews of the sort of the challenges that pretty much most of the users we spoke to faced, kind of across the paths that they were taking. So users are often very time poor. They often, especially in public sector organisations, are working with really restrictive IT policies and often very limited computing power. And one of the things that kind of came up a lot was a concern around the lack of coordination. So there's people doing things in different places and in siloed ways, and no one's really coordinating and thinking about how to do this in a systematic way. And we were having an interesting chat at lunchtime a little bit around this. And so, I think that's a real key concern for people, and trying to find ways to overcome that from the Digital Solutions Hub point of view, I think is a really key value that it can bring. As I've said, that there's real issues around what data is available. People often talked about a patchy data landscape. So the fact that it wasn't always clear to understand what was going to be available for what, and that people faced massive gaps in terms of resolution and time. Non-standard geographies. When we went to Northern Ireland, they were talking about real issues around the fact that for them the geographies made real issues compared to what was generally the way it was done over on the mainland. And as I've kind of mentioned already, real issues around accessibility and formats, and in terms of both licensing and the kind of actual what the format is of being able to kind of use it for the purpose that they need. The quality of the data was a really mixed picture. So some people said that they're able to get incredibly great, wonderful data for this tiny bit, but when they wanted to try and then get it for a different area to compare or for a different time period or something like that, that was a real issue. And that the metadata, or often the lack of it, was a real issue in terms of, as I was saying, helping them with those earlier steps of figuring out whether or not it was suitable for what they needed. And then when they got their hands on the data, sometimes one of the big issues was the fact that some of these data sets are massive and very, very, kind of unwieldy. And so actually having the kind of capability and the IT infrastructure to be able to start doing stuff with it, or to, test out whether or not it was actually going to meet their needs was a real challenge for them. I think one of the things that people talked about as well, and in some ways it's kind of come out in what I've said already, but the data is held in a lot of different places. And people aren't always very aware of all of the places in which it might be held, and trying to navigate all of those different platforms and portals and hubs and everything is a real pain for people actually, and really difficult, and helping people know what's available, where it's available is really important. I've already talked a lot about the kind of fact that it's not necessarily held in the formats that are very helpful, but also they can often be held in systems that make it very hard to kind of know that it's there or search it as well, so that's also obviously a challenge. And in terms of this sort of proliferation, yes, of platforms and portals and hubs and things, is that it isn't always easy for people who aren't kind of intimately involved in them to know what the purpose of them is, and so it can be hard to kind of know whether, is that one actually for me and what I'm trying to do. And it's hard to keep up with the sheer range of them. There's a lot of initiatives to create this sort of stuff now. And there's lots of value to it, obviously, but it's just trying to find ways to make it as user-friendly as possible for people. And some of the platforms that people told us about are very clunky to use, in terms of they required a lot of sign-ins and kind of jumping through hoops before you could even work out whether it was actually going to be useful to you. And again, that's not a particularly helpful thing for people. So some of the kind of key takeaways, I talked a lot about the challenges, some of the key takeaways that I think that we kind of came away with in terms of thinking about the digital solutions hub, but also I think thinking about if you're creating data for other people to use. These are sort of summarised in this. I should say that there's a report on the last slide, we've got a QR code for it, you can go and find lots more information, but this is us giving you a very quick run through. So there's a real tension between quality versus quantity. So in some ways, giving people access to all of the data everywhere is great, and people are kind of, there's generally quite a big push towards making more data available. But then people do feel kind of overwhelmed, and they don't know how to kind of sift through it and work out whether or not it's actually suitable for what they need. From a hub point of view, there is this real kind of interesting dilemma maybe around whether it would make more sense to create a kind of curated data set that really helps people to know that if they're accessing data through the Digital Solutions Hub, that it absolutely meets a particular quality, that it's going to do exactly what it says on the tin, and that they totally understand what it is. But is that at a loss of not allowing more people to access more data that might be useful to them? Different users have really different analysis kind of needs, and so some people were very technically capable, and they just said, I don't want you to do anything to the data, I want the raw data, just let me have it, and I want to be able to get it myself and do stuff with it myself, or I want to be able to access it through stable links and be able to kind of play with it that way. And it was really important to them not, for there not to be lots of processing done to it, and that they really wanted to be able to kind of deal with it raw, really. Whereas loads of other people we spoke to said, oh, no, that sounds a bit, I don't really want to deal with that. Like, what I'd love to do is have tools and things like that where I can, play with things and explore trends and try and test things out. And essentially they're much less technical from a data perspective, but they were having to use data in their jobs, and so they wanted to be able to use it in that way, but without having to have that big learning curve of being able to do all of the kind of clever analysis stuff. And interestingly, one of the things that came out is that often when you're working on these sort of big digital developments, is that you focus a lot on the tech, and you think that the complicated or hard bits are going to be the tech delivery. But actually, I think there's so much around here that's about people and community and not tech stuff. And lots of people told us that they really wanted to see the hub to act as a kind of something that would create a community of practice where people could share best practice, where people could share tools around how to use bits of data, where they could share code, where they could where potentially the work of processing in terms of cleaning and transforming and things like that could be shared and not having duplicated effort. And so I think it's really interesting when we think about these things and we think about how we kind of make this data available, is to think about the people and the soft side of things as well, because I think that's really where sometimes these things will kind of fly or not, is that if you can actually get people using it and talking to each other and understanding how to kind of make the most of this. I think also, just to add to that a little bit, just as come to me, is that obviously having a community of people that know about your data or in this case the digital solutions hub also helps for people to know it exists and helps people to signpost people to it and to kind of really maximise its use, and I think that's really important as well. So that's it for our little whistle-stop tour of our research.